one broken-down car, one impossible choice. A single father, drowning in accusations he couldn't fight, exhausted from working double shifts just to keep his daughter out of foster care, driving home through a storm that matched the chaos in his life. Then he saw her, a stranger, standing in the pouring rain beside a luxury car, desperate and alone. He could have kept driving. He should have kept driving. He had every reason to look the other way. But he stopped. He didn't know that one act of kindness would become the most dangerous and miraculous decision of his life. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The wipers scraped across the glass in their endless rhythm, and Damien's eyes burned from the double shift he'd just pulled. Loading trucks, scanning boxes, moving, always moving. Because if he stopped, if he let himself think too long about the trial date circled in red on their kitchen calendar, he'd fall apart. 3 weeks. He had 3 weeks before everything ended. Then he saw it. Hazard lights blinking weakly through the curtain of rain. A red luxury car pulled onto the shoulder of Maple Avenue, the kind of vehicle that cost more than he'd make in 5 years. A woman stood beside it, her silhouette barely visible, the other frantically jabbing at her phone. Damien's foot eased off the gas pedal. His car slowed.
"Keep driving," the voice in his head whispered. "You're exhausted. She probably has roadside assistance. Someone with a car like that has insurance, has money, has people who can help." But something about her posture, the way her shoulders shook, whether from cold or frustration he couldn't tell, made his chest tighten. His mother's voice cut through his thoughts, as clear as if she were sitting in the passenger seat. "Character isn't about what you do when things are good, Damien. It's what you do when everything's falling apart." His jaw clenched. Everything was already falling apart. Gregory Phillips. The name tasted like acid. 6 months ago, $47,000 had vanished from their small landscaping company's accounts. 6 months ago, Gregory had looked him in the eye and accused him of taking it. 6 months ago, Damien's entire world had collapsed. The worst part? Gregory had been convincing. The doctored financial records, the forged signatures, the fake email trail, all of it pointed to Damien. And Gregory had better lawyers, better connections, better everything. "The evidence looks bad," his court-appointed attorney had told him just last week, Mr. Flores' kind eyes full of sympathy that felt like pity. "I believe you're innocent, Damien, but proving it, that's going to be tough." If convicted, he'd get up to 5 years. 5 years of Amelia growing up without him. 5 years of her being shuffled through foster homes because her mother had walked out when she was 2, leaving nothing but a note that said she wasn't cut out for this life. The thought of 7-year-old Amelia with her missing front tooth and her habit of putting her shoes on the wrong feet, alone in the system. Damien's car rolled to a stop behind the red sedan.
The rain hit him like a wall the moment he stepped out, instantly soaking through his already damp cloth. He raised one hand as he approached, making sure she could see him clearly, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The woman turned, and even through the rain, he could see her body tense. Fear. She was afraid of him. Of course she was. A strange man approaching on a deserted road at midnight. "Ma'am," he called out, staying several feet back, making sure both hands were visible. "You okay? Car trouble?" She hesitated, studying him. Water streamed down her face, her clothes completely soaked. Then, as if making a decision, she nodded. "It just died. Won't turn over at all." Her voice was steady despite the situation, controlled. Professional, the kind of voice that was used to being heard, to commanding respect. "Mind if I'd take a look?" Damien asked. "I'm not a mechanic, but I've kept enough old cars running to maybe help." Another pause. Then, Please, I'd appreciate it." She popped the hood and Damien stepped forward. The rain pelted the back of his neck as he leaned over the engine, and for a moment he was grateful for the distraction. This problem he could maybe fix. This problem didn't involve lawyers and courtrooms and the terrified look in his daughter's eyes. His fingers traced along wires and connections, and within minutes he'd found it. "Your battery terminal's loose," he called over the sound of the rain. "Probably got jarred by a pothole. You got any tools?" No, I don't think so." Damien jogged back to his sedan, water streaming down his face, and grabbed his toolkit from the trunk.
As he worked, tightening the connection and cleaning the corrosion from the terminal with the edge of an old rag, he found himself talking, filling the silence the way he did when Amelia couldn't sleep. "This battery's on its last legs," he said, his fingers working despite the cold. "You should get a new one soon. There's a gas station about 2 miles up the road. They'll have them." He could feel her watching him. Even in the rain and darkness, he registered her face, the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the way she carried herself with quiet authority despite being stranded and soaked. She was the kind of woman who commanded rooms, he could tell, the kind who made decisions that mattered. The connection clicked into place and Damien straightened, wiping rain from his eyes. "Try it now." She slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. The relief on her face was immediate, genuine, transforming her features. "How much do I owe you?" She was already reaching for her purse. Damien shook his head, backing toward his car. "Just glad I could help, ma'am." "Wait, at least tell me your name so I can thank you properly." He turned back, rain streaming down his face, and for a moment their eyes met fully. He saw gratitude there, and something else, a kind of respect, like she was seeing something in him that most people missed. "Damien," he said. Then, because he was too tired to be cautious, because the trial was 3 weeks away and nothing mattered anymore, "Damien Wells." "Thank you, Damien Wells," she said, her voice warm despite the cold. "You might just have saved my night." If only you knew, he thought, climbing back into his car, if only you knew you might just have been helped by a man the world thinks is a thief. He pulled away, watching her hazard lights disappear in his rearview mirror. He'd never asked her name. In 3 weeks, none of this would matter anyway. He was wrong about that. 3 weeks later, Damien sat in Hartford County Criminal Court, his cheap suit borrowed from Mr. Flores because he couldn't afford to buy one. His hands were clammy, his heart racing so fast he thought he might pass out. This was it. The moment that would decide whether he got to tuck Amelia in tonight or whether he'd spend the next 5 years watching her grow up through prison glass. Mr. Flores sat beside him, organizing papers with practiced efficiency, but Damien could see the worry in his attorney's eyes. They both knew how this looked. They both knew what happened to people like Damien when they went up against people like Gregory. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Kendall Ross," the bailiff announced. Damien stood on shaking legs, his eyes fixed on the floor. He couldn't bring himself to look up, couldn't bear to see the face of the person who held his entire future in their hands. But then something made him glance up. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. The judge entered, black robes flowing, her posture commanding and authoritative as she took her seat behind the bench, and Damien's breath caught in his throat. Wait. He knew that face. Those eyes. That way of carrying herself with quiet authority. His mind flashed back to the rainy night, the woman beside the red car, the gratitude in her eyes when he'd fixed her battery terminal. No, it couldn't be. But the more he stared, the more certain he became, and the more impossible it seemed. The woman he'd helped 3 weeks ago was now sitting behind that bench, holding a gavel that would determine his fate. His heart hammered in his chest. Was he imagining this? The lighting was different now, harsh fluorescent instead of darkness and rain. She was in formal robes instead of soaked clothes. Her hair was pulled back severely instead of wet and loose around her face. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe his desperate mind was seeing connections that didn't exist, looking for hope in impossible places. But those eyes, the shape of her face, the way she held herself. Damien's hands gripped the edge of the table. He wanted to say something, to ask, to confirm, but how could he? What would he even say? "Excuse me, Your Honor, did I fix your car 3 weeks ago?" He glanced at Mr. Flores, but his attorney was focused on his notes, completely unaware of the storm raging inside Damien's head. The judge, Judge Ross, the bailiff had said, was looking down at the case file, her expression neutral and professional.
If she recognized him, she gave no sign of it, not a flicker of acknowledgement, not a hint of familiarity. Maybe it wasn't her? Maybe he was losing his mind. The proceedings began, and Damien tried to focus, tried to listen to the prosecutor's opening statements and Mr. Flores' responses, but his mind kept returning to that face behind the bench. It looked like her. It really looked like her. But how could it be? What was the odds? Throughout the hearing, Damien found himself stealing glances at Judge Ross, trying to be certain, trying to reconcile the desperate woman in the rain with this stern figure of authority. Every time he looked, he was more convinced, and every time he told himself he had to be wrong. Then something happened that made his heart stop. The prosecutor was presenting the photocopied financial documents, and Judge Ross leaned forward, her eyes sharp as she examined them. "Mr. Davis? These are photocopies. Where are the originals?" Damien's breath caught. It was her. It had to be her.
But she never looked at him, never gave any sign that she knew who he was. Her face remained perfectly neutral, perfectly professional, as she questioned the prosecutor about the evidence. "I have concerns about these documents," she said firmly. "This court will not proceed based on photocopies of photocopies. Mr. Flores, I'm granting your motion for forensic examination. We'll reconvene when we have properly authenticated documents." The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and Damien flinched. As the courtroom began to clear, Damien remained seated, his mind reeling. Mr. Flores was talking beside him, explaining what had just happened, how unusual it was, how lucky they were. But Damien barely heard him. His eyes were on Judge Ross as she gathered her files and disappeared into her chambers. Was it her? Had the woman he'd helped in the rain just saved him right back? Or was his desperate mind playing tricks on him, creating hope where there was none? He wanted to believe. He wanted so badly to believe. But he couldn't be sure. And that uncertainty would haunt him for the next 2 weeks.